It's
I
painful.
compare him. I compare him to MacArthur, uh,
Yes.
who we'll talk about in just a minute. I'm going to ask you
Yeah.
about. But at some point, these guys start to believe their own press, their own
Yes.
headlines.
Yep.
And I forget if it was Longstreet or AP Hill. I want to say Longstreet died never having forgiven Lee for
Mhm.
Gettysburg. He was saying, "Look, a couple of the generals were saying D.C. is right there.
Yep.
We can go there. If we show up in D.C., the war's over. They'll sue for a peace. We'll have a Confederacy."
Absolutely.
And Lee says, "Nah, whoop them here. Whoop them here."
This is the Free Zone Communique, transmitting from Virginia's unoccupied sector. If you think smart cities, DEI, censorship, government intrusion, bug paste, and other left-wing nonsense are no longer a possibility, think again. We've won one election with slim majorities. Our work to rebuild a free and sane America has just begun.
This is the Free Zone Communique. I'm your host, Matt Jordan, bringing hope to victims trapped behind the wire in blue cities. Today, we're going to continue with a theme I started a short time back. Keep things on a military theme. It's a part of the salute to the Army and Navy's 250th. Today, we have, I guarantee you, an amazing treat. We have a military historian, Professor Michael Stroud. I'm going to talk to him about his background. We're going to talk about a little known battle. At the time, it seemed insignificant, unimportant, uh, not to the British, but in a grander scheme of things. And yet, it would feed our knowledge of warfare to the present day. Those who learned the lesson did so to their benefit. Those who did not learn the lessons of this battle um, did so to their regret.
Please hang up and try again.
At the bottom of the page, I'll leave links where you can find all our stuff. Wherever you get the P4B in the Free Zone, please follow, subscribe, leave reviews and comments, and share, share, share. This is how we grow. I'll leave a link to where you can support the P4B directly so you too can be a political party pooper. But the most pleasure you can get by supporting us is to shop Pearl River. I'll leave samples and links for that as well. Thanks to all our supporters and subscribers. Joining us now is Professor Michael Stroud. I mentioned what an important guest he is. He's a professor of history, and as I said in the intro, this is part of our celebration of the Army and Navy's 250th, continuing with this show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
It's good to have you. It's a high honor. This is one of those times I've been on a roll with really good guests, and I want to keep the streak alive.
All
So
right.
this is definitely one of those times. Um, we're going to talk about a lot of issues today, but there is one issue. The main reason I wanted to bring Michael on was to discuss an obscure battle. It's one that most people would gloss over in history is not terribly important, but it has implications all the way to today.
Yeah.
Before we do that, where do you teach, Mike?
I actually teach at a small university here in Michigan called Cornerstone University. It's in Grand Rapids, so kind of the middle part of the state, as it were. I teach numerous history classes from ancient history to local history to United States history. History has always been that lifelong passion. So it's great to be able to engage young people, make them excited about something that, frankly, always got a bad rap in school. So I make it fun. I make it engaging. There's no wallflowers in my classes, and I know I like to keep it interesting too. So we're always engaged in something.
Well, that's huge. When a professor can get you to engage, it's one thing to coast through the class and collect your D and walk away, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
that's not how that works.
but you
I,
go ahead.
I'd love to make it a multi-staged approach because for me, history's been the best. It's the best story Hollywood can never tell because there's so much involved. There's so much passion. There's so much excitement. There's mystery. It has all those things Hollywood tries to do, but you can find it in a good magazine or a great history book at any time you pick it up. So I try to convey some portion of that to my students about the reality of these people. Who were they as people above just a name in a book or a static person? These are live, real people in the context of their time doing sometimes the most dangerous things possible or the most amazing things or just trying to get through and survive that day. And so I always like to tell the real stories, the nitty gritty stuff, the good, bad, and the ugly, as it were. But I like to tie in short videos and music. I love during the Civil War time playing real Civil War music that they would have heard at the time. It
Yeah.
brings it to life more. I bring my Civil War kepi and talk to them about the different types of hats and what they meant. You know, we like to make it gritty and real. And it's always good to see young people going, wow, that's really cool. That makes me feel like I've done my job because if one person feels inspired to go and research more of that, then that's what we want because history belongs to everybody. And our young people really need to understand and immerse and appreciate it. And it just takes somebody to help guide them along.
Well, there's a couple things you just said that are important. One, you talked about Hollywood. Hollywood can do dumb things, like put Ben Affleck on a train station in New York headed for London.
Absolutely.
Uh, Now, the reality is, and if anybody who saw that movie and didn't know Czech, they would have found out he was actually going to Canada.
Right.
But that the impression you're left with is he's off to Grantham Airfield and outside of London. But the good thing about Hollywood in settings like this, if it does spark your interest, if you think, wow, the 300 was an amazing movie, or the Patriot was great,
Yeah.
go ahead and look at the real deal. The real deal is even better.
Absolutely.
And you'll sound smarter than your friends because you'll be able to say, well, the battle didn't actually take place that way. Let me explain it to you.
I love that. You're spot on. You know, Hollywood's job is to entertain, right? Put butts in seats.
Right.
So if they do a good job within a historical context, that's great. My hope of any history related Hollywood film, hey, if that inspires you to go, man, that was really cool. I want to know more about it. Then to me, as a historian, that's a great thing. If we can inspire even one person out of a theater to go, I want to learn more about that actual event, awesome. I don't go to Hollywood to get my history because I'm not going to get it. I'm going to get Hollywood versions of things. Hopefully it's entertaining and it's fun and it's bigger than life and it's crazy and all that stuff. But Hollywood's not my go-to for real history. It's a go-to for entertainment, which is their job.
Okay. A couple more quick points before we go to the battle. Number one, you know of which you speak because you didn't come upon your job as an outgrowth of being a lifetime academic.
No,
You
absolutely
lived in the
not.
real world.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, I've had a very diverse professional background. I actually spent 30 years as a store manager and executive of various retailers from Apple to J.C. Penney's as kind of my first real job, 30 years grinding it out in three different states. During that period, I put a lot of service in. I spent 7 years as a reserve police officer, a paid reserve police officer as well. Spent about 7, 8 years as a Coast Guard auxiliary officer, which is the volunteer component of the Coast Guard itself. So I did all that simultaneously at the same time. But the common thread that kind of ran through everything as I interacted and did all that was I've always been passionate about history. history for me is really personal, and it started when I discovered my father's army uniform in the closet about 1978, and I wanted to know about, well, what does all that mean? And
Mhm.
that really started my passion and my love for wanting to understand it and learn about it and learn what it all meant. And so I spent a lot of time at the library. So history became my passion, my vocation, as it were, outside of my job. But about I would say about 5, 10 years ago, I'm like, I've been doing this career path for a long time, and it's been fine. It's provided what it needed to do and all that, but it wasn't my passion. And I looked at things. I was like, what's been my passion? History. So what do I need to do to kind of make my passion official? Maybe a second career, a second go around, as it were. So I went back to school. I still worked full time. I took all my classes online. So I went through that as I worked 50 plus hours a week. I got my BA in military history, and then I went immediately from that into my MA, and still did all that while working 50 hours a week. So, and once during all that time, I was very fortunate enough to have professional historians that were some of my professors really encouraged me to get some of my work out because they thought, even as an undergrad, they thought I had some really good value to provide. So I had some great partners that encouraged me, and I was able to reach out and start getting work published during my undergrad time. So as I kept doing that and finishing school, I left the retail world, as it were, early, just last year now, 2020, 24. And then I was able to have fortuitous timing and was just checking some postings for the university I'm at now, and they just had put a job opening for right within my wheelhouse, history, and I was able to get
Boom.
hired. I've been there ever since. So it's been a fantastic journey of one end to the other. And like I tell my students, it's like follow your passions, and it's never too late, because you can always reinvent and pursue what you really love and what excites you. And for me, it's history, and I love being able to tell it and engage others.
Yeah, yeah. I have to admire that because my brother got his RN from soup to nuts, beginning to end, while climbing telephone poles for the phone company. And if you know guys who climb poles and do phone and high voltage, these people are animals.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It is
And
not
they
easy.
work long ass hours. And he got his degree and actually started his internship while still climbing telephone poles. So that's anybody who takes their professional life and makes such a radical shift, I respect that.
And it for me, it's just about investing in myself. I've had a really good family on both sides that were really were supportive of reading. Knowledge is everything. So I had that support structure my whole life. I was real fortunate enough to be the first one to go to college and get a master's and a bachelor's. So that to me is really an important part of our family on both sides, for me to be able to kind of carry that on and kind of set a new path for potentially others in my family to do so as well.
And you're not a Wolverine.
I am not a
When
Wolverine.
when I heard Michigan, I was worried about that. See,
No, my wife and three of my four stepkids are all MSU grads. So a lot of green and white in this house, and a lot of checks went to Lansing. So
nice. Well, as a father of a Penn State grad, I don't have to hate you.
nope, thank goodness. Yeah, the U of M thing, Ann Arbor stays over there.
That's a huge rivalry.
Oh,
Ohio
yeah.
State and the Wolverines are Penn State's. They either the thing to celebrate or be miserable about for a year at a time. But let's cut to it
Yeah.
because I like you. I love history. I love looking at lessons learned. I like military history. There was a battle that took place. Um, and in fact, before I do that, we keep these side notes for the listener and the viewer. Um, we're going to go into some serious stuff here, but don't be intimidated because you're going to be able to get all of it in August. How's that going to work, Mike? When does the article come out?
Yeah, the magazine and the article, which I have my contributor's copy here. is Strategy and Tactics issue 354. That issue should be hitting shelves in August. I just don't have an exact date. So usually between the second and third week of August, they usually show up on like Barnes and Noble and any other bookstore. They should be at any of those stores.
Do you know if Amazon carries the magazine?
I'm not sure if I think you can buy individual issues. You can also go through Strategy and Tactics website and order individual issues as well.
Yeah, strategy and tactics. So make a note.
Yes.
It's an interesting article, and you're going to be able to catch all up on everything that we're going to talk about. But I want to use it as a precursor to um, more recent history. But what happened back in the Punjab in 18? Well, you have to start ahead, say 1845, 46, and take us to the battle.
Yeah, I'm actually going to back us up slightly a little bit more because it's important to have some global context or regional context, as it were, as to where we're at. So the mid to latter part of the 1800s, the main superpower in the world was Great Britain. Great Britain at that point had been a colonial global superpower from one end of the globe to the other. And that was all based upon the Royal Navy itself allowed them to kind of interdict and project power throughout the entire world. So one of those areas that was of keen interest, both for predominantly driven by trade, was the Middle East and specifically India. India was very much a gold mine, as it were, of resources for Britain and for others. France tried their hand at it; didn't work so well for France, but England became the dominant colonial power by the 1800s in Greater India. They did that through partnerships with the East India Company, which was very much trading at the end of a musket barrel or a sword. So East India Company was kind of the armed financial component of Greater Great Britain in my mind. That's how I like to view them. Um, so they were an extension of power that oversaw the economic viability and concerns of the empire as a whole, using local military forces a lot to enforce English expectations, let's put it like that, wherever they were.
Yeah, they would convert locals into like mercenaries for the East India
Yeah,
Company.
basically they were. Yeah, they would utilize British officers to lead, coach, and train, and all that, and to lead these troops because anything less than that was not English, and that was not going to happen. Always the officers would be English, but they would leverage the resources there because Britain was an island nation. Lacks the manpower to have English troops throughout the entire world. They never had the benefit of that being so restrictive in size. But what they had was money, and money buys a lot of help and a lot of resources. So that's why, as their empire was global, the money was flowing to London. So then they had the coffers full enough, generally speaking, in order to pay local troops to serve as their backbone for maintaining authority in these colonial outposts. And that's where we start to find ourselves in the mid 1800s, 1845 specifically, because I want to back up. So we're talking about Britain getting into a conflict with what's called the Sikh Empire. So most people in the West aren't aware, well, what's the Sikh Empire? There's a couple things I want to lay the foundation
I
for.
never knew there was an empire. I thought Sikhs were just a sect.
Exactly. And that's usually the general response for most folks. So Sikhism is a religion. Some people may be aware of it now. Sikhism is actually the fifth largest religion in the world at this time, but it's also it's an offshoot religion that started as Hinduism, but is created by a guru, Nanak, I believe his name was, and that led to a creation and a carving of territory. And the best way to kind of relay it is on this map. So we have Greater British India, but the Sikhs were able to carve out their own empire that basically it's in the Punjab area of northern India and what we know as Pakistan now. So they had a pretty good chunk of land there. and they exercised their authority within this Sikh empire based on Sikh principles, the religious principles, but they were able to hold that together with a really strong army called the Khalsa. The Khalsa army, and Khalsa means um, um, the pure, means the pure. In Sikhism, just let you know, Sikh means student or disciple. So a disciple of the faith, but the Khalsa or the pure were basically the protectors of the faith, the militant arm. So they were actually a pretty well trained army. They had Indian irregular cavalry, infantry. They had components of the Khalsa that were modernized and trained by French and English. So they had different components that would be referred to as the English Khalsa or the French Khalsa within the main Khalsa Sikh Empire army. And they had actually high quality artillery as well. So the Khalsa army would prove to be the most concerning kind of native force that the British Empire would ever face for what they would be able to challenge them in open combat. Not so much guerrilla warfare, but open kind of European style fighting. And it wouldn't always work out so well for the English. We'll preview that. But to take it back, so the Sikh had their empire and Britain had Greater India, but Britain wasn't really happy about that. There's like the Punjab's real important. It's kind of the strategic gateway to other viable areas.
The bridge.
So
yeah.
Absolutely. So strategically, the English are chomping at the bit to get into there. They're like, man, we really need to be a part of this. We need to get into there. But at the same time, the Sikh Empire was not oblivious to the English aspirations, let's say there, because England was slowly, the English troops in Greater India were getting closer to their boundaries. They were building up more and more troops. So it became obvious to the Sikh, it's like, look, this is a matter of time. These guys are going to roll in here and just try to take it away, or we can try to preempt it, have a preemptive strike, which is something we know very much about in modern times as we hear about preemptive strikes, right? Trying to head off a larger war by if we strike first. So the Khalsa decided to basically launch an attack across their borders in English territory to kind of get after the English before the English got after them. Historically, it's interesting because there's some back and forth as to did the leaders of the Sikh Empire really kind of prompt the Khalsa army to invade, because there were a lot of officials in the Sikh Empire that felt the Khalsa were getting too powerful, too influential within the empire, and maybe a little conflict with Britain would bring them down a notch or two and make it easier for the politicians to control everything.
Right.
Kind of interesting concept. So
there's not and Mao were good at it.
Right. So there isn't concrete proof, but it's an interesting kind of back and forth there. But either way, the war was launched when they attacked some British outposts. But it wouldn't play out so well for the Sikhs at the time. By the time it ended, the first Sikh wars that came to be called was only about a year, ended about 1846. So the Khalsa, though, whether they were prodded to attack or not by their own politicians, what's interesting to keep in mind is just several years before, the first Anglo-Afghan war ended in 1842. That did not end well for the English at all. Basically, the retreating English army, I think out of Kabul, was almost massacred by Afghan troops. So it greatly diminished the invincibility aspect that the British portrayed to the world for so long.
It almost brought down the monarchy.
It did, because, boy, there was a lot of uproar back home about that whole incident. And the Khalsa were very aware of that. They're like, well, look, these guys just got their butt handed to them by a bunch of tribesmen in Afghanistan. Maybe we have a good shot at this, protecting our land and pushing them back. So I think there's a lot to be said for being very aware of the situation within the greater geographic area, but also that emboldened them to really seek to be the ones to drive into the English, not wait for them to come on their terms. So they did. So the Sikh army drove across the border. hit a couple British outposts, inflicted casualties. But during that time, the English called upon Sir Henry Gow, an Irishman, to kind of lead British efforts and kind of squash that. Now, when the war ended, and as I said, it's only a year, it didn't really put an end to anything. I just like to say it postponed it. That was round one, because at the time, the British in the Treaty of Lahore, which became their new kind of headquarters for that area in the Punjab, they took some of the Sikh Empire, they installed a British kind of politician, a governor, to kind of oversee the Sikh Council. Want to make sure things go, and things need to go the way we need them to go. We're kind of calling the shots. Your people are here, but it's really what we say. Needless, that doesn't sit so well with the Sikh people and within the Sikh Empire by any means. This gentleman is Sir Henry Lawrence, and no relation to T.E. Lawrence, actually. I actually did some research on that. Says no relation, but it would have been fun if they would have been, though. If that would have been
For the
interesting.
viewer, I did ask Mike that pre-show. There was a relation there.
Absolutely. So Henry Lawrence is in the court. The treaty's been signed. People are not happy. They're not happy at all. In the Sikh Empire, they're like, we have nominal control of our own empire because the British are just telling us what to do. They make it much worse, though, when the regent mother of their ruler, the mother's name was Maharani Jin Kaur. The child ruler at the time was very young. It was Dulip Singh. So the mom called the shots, but the English decided, you know what? We're going to take things up a notch. So Sir Henry Lawrence decides the mom's kind of trouble. We don't need her in the way. So let's just exile her and kick her out of her own empire. So that's like stirring a hornet's nest.
Yeah.
That really didn't sit well. So right now you've got a cauldron of animosity just boiling just everywhere in the Sikh Empire, especially within Lahore and anywhere there's direct British influence. It's really bad.
I think it demonstrates the hubris of Western powers, especially at that time. By the 1800s, no Western power would have sat by and said, well, we're just going to take the queen out because, she's not convenient. And yet they felt they could do those kinds of things with impunity because
Yep.
they looked at these people as little savages, and the Sikhs were not savages.
No,
Some of
no.
them were rather worldly.
Yes.
Trade
Yep.
and travel. They knew how the world worked.
Yep. Absolutely. And it's that I call it a superiority complex
Yeah.
that has been prevalent for a long time, as you and I know. And we would see that with colonial power and authority in the Western Hemisphere throughout North, Central, and South America. It played out throughout the entire world in one fashion or another. So that was still very much in play in the early mid 1800s, very much so. So, but as we know, that leads to underestimation, which, as we go through the discussion and tie it into other things, that's
Yeah.
very much a problem. so, so we've exiled. So the British have exiled the regent mother, who was beloved by the Sikh, which has already got everything stirring up. People are really fired up in the worst way about everything. So then we go to another location as things are boiling, things aren't good. There's a gentleman by the name of Chopra. He's the governor of this fortress city called Multan. It's a very important geographic holding area. It's about 200 miles southwest of Lahore, which is the capital for the English within the area. So Chopra is really not happy with the taxing situation that the English are imposing upon him and his people in the area. So he questions that to the English. He challenges that back, actually. Well, that doesn't play over well. England doesn't play around with things like that, especially when it involves money. The East India Company specifically is not having that. So they're like, you know what? We have a troublemaker here too. So let's just replace him. We're going to send in a couple of our own guys, and take care of these things. So the English decide to replace him with a gentleman, two guys, Surtur Khan and Lieutenant Vance Agnew, to kind of go and replace him because we need people more amicable to our way of thinking over here.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
upon their arrival, though, things really don't go over well. And basically, this becomes the powder keg for the whole thing to blow up into the Second Sikh War. So upon arrival, though, the people were so incensed because word had gotten out that Chopra was going to be replaced, that he was being removed from office, that as soon as the Englishmen arrived, Lieutenant Agnew, him and his cohort, his English partner, were both killed by this Sikh mob, and actually Agnew was beheaded. Now, Surtur Khan is not because he's Sikh. So basically, he was supposed to come and help kind of quell the disturbance. Well, he decided, wow, these English guys just got their head removed for them. And you know what? I think I'm just going to side with my friends here. So he basically sends a note out to everybody saying, yeah, we're not going to be doing anything about this uprising. In fact, we're going to side with our brethren here. Well, it's like, uh-oh, here we go. So now we have a key fortress in a province that's real important to British holding within the Punjab area, now in the hands of rebels or uprising. At first, though, when the word gets back to the head of the East India Company's commissioner, as it were, this gentleman by the name of Sir Frederick Curry. When he gets word, he thinks, oh, geez, it's just they're acting up again. Kind of that indifferent, kind of top-down attitude, right? That English,
Yeah.
oh, we're looking down on these guys. Good grief. They're acting up again. Kind of acting like children, trying to treat them like kids in a lot of ways. So what does he do? So he dispatches a Khalsa army, because a lot of the Khalsa, there was a segment that were sided with the English during all this. There, as we talked about earlier, they like to use local forces. So the contingent of the Sikh army that was allied with the English was dispatched. I think it was like 7 battalions were sent to kind of quell that, kind of put a stop to the nonsense that was happening at Multan. Well, they march there, they arrive at Multan, and immediately join up with the brethren. So you got a much bigger force now. So now you've got 7 battalions joined with those that were already there. Now we have a real problem. So when that word gets back, now Curry finds out about that and goes, okay, maybe we have a problem. I need more troops. So he sends
I was
word.
about to say, at what point does somebody wake up and say, we're in trouble here?
Yeah, it's like getting the report. Uh-oh, yeah, now we have a problem. So he sends word to the Governor General of India this time, Lord Dalhousie. He is the top dog, as it were, in all of India, the Greater India. So he oversees the flow of the coffers and the operation of Greater India for the benefit of the empire. He gets word, and let's just say he's less than happy. So he immediately demands the creation of a relief army to go to Multan and put an end to this not nonsense. He wants a full army, though. So who does he task? He tasks the hero of the first Sikh War, Sir Henry Gow, to lead that effort once again. So Sir Henry goes about starting to build his army, as it were, to go about that. So as the army, it takes time because it's India. They didn't plan on it, because it's also important to note between the first Sikh War and the second Sikh War, Britain, like any power, they only want to keep armies in the field and pay for stuff when they have to. So they didn't think they would need to have this big standing army, so they had downsized a lot of their troops and the local troops that they had in Greater India. So it was going to take time, because now they have to ramp up the other way. So they got to break out the coffers, they got to start paying for more troops and make things happen. So it's going to take a little bit of time, but Gow is no slouch, because having been a hero of the first Sikh War, but he also had a lot of combat experience in tough situations. He saw action in 1812 during the Peninsula Campaign against the French. He was a commander-in-chief during the first Opium War in China. So he's had a lot of experience. And plus, just being the hero of the last war that was only 2 years ago, 1846. We're now at 1848. He's well versed in the population and the geography and such, so he should be the right fit for the job. So they immediately task him to raise a force to get to the Punjab and to put a stop to the nonsense as the British thought that was happening. So the available British forces in the area had already gathered and continued to gather and lay siege to Multan. And those British forces would build up over time, and they would eventually force the capitulation of the Sikh in the fortress itself, eventually causing the Sikh defenders to retreat back to the citadel, just like in medieval times.
Right,
It's
right.
funny because the more things change, the more they stay the same in
Understand
concept.
the same. Yep.
So that was interesting. So that's what happened. So they had kind of backed into the citadel, but eventually, from artillery and just more and more English supporting troops arrived, they had no chance. They eventually would surrender itself. But during this time, as Gao was gathered his troops and he's starting to make his way, he gets wind of the fact that Singh, who had taken those 7 battalions and more, his dad has rebelled also and has a Sikh army too. And they're trying to link up because they know you're always much stronger together than divided, especially against the English. So it becomes a little bit of a race because Gao knows I need to meet these guys individually, which is something that Napoleon always did. Napoleon loved to split armies and beat them in turn. So Gao was trying very much to do the same thing, but this time it was with the Sikh on their own territory. What was really interesting is that we would see things in his army, stuff like what's called Zambaruks. Zambaruks are these camels that had mounted swivel guns on their humps. Some of those showed up during the Multan siege, but as a really unique way of adding some extra mobile firepower in a very interesting environment. Yeah, I mean, supposedly they provided additional five. I don't know how effective, but boy, that would be a sight to see a camel with his humps and swivel gun on the top.
Now they use Tacoma pickups, but the idea of what kind of caliber gun would this be?
Yeah, that I don't have that handy. I would think it'd be really close in concept to the small deck guns that English ships would have at the time, the swivel guns.
The Dell guns, yeah.
Yes, I think that's where we're thinking around that size. But what an interesting thing to see that, you have your regular troops, irregular cavalry, and then the camels come. And to have 80 of these would be an interesting sight. So I think that would be something. But eventually, the walls were breached and Multan fell. To kind of backtrack slightly, around January 1st, 1849, and the defenders, there were about 4,000 of them, marched out into captivity. But it still took 3 weeks from the main fortress falling on January 1st. It took till January 22nd before the citadel was finally breached and forced them. So that's still 3 weeks more of hard fighting and siege warfare that those guys held out. So really impressive. That right there should have been a real clue to the English already that this second round isn't going to be just a walk in the park. These guys are fighting tooth and nail.
Plus, if I could move things forward just a bit, that 3 weeks would give the secondary force
a
chance to close.
Absolutely. Yep. And that allowed him to gather about 12,000 infantry. So Gao right now had his force. He's marching to try to head off Sher Singh. He's got 12,500 infantry, which out of that, only about 3,000 were British. The rest were Khalsa troops. So that's really, so it's a much smaller percentage of dedicated English professional troops. He had about 3,500 cavalry and some artillery. So his goal is he's trying to cut off and give battle to Sher Singh before he can link up with his dad. His name is Chadar Singh. So they have an engagement at the as called the Battle of Ramnagar on the 22nd of November, 1849. That really the Sikhs had taken cover with their artillery and their infantry on the other side of the river, so the English would have to use their cavalry trying to charge up into that. So they were beat back with a heavy artillery fire, but it was kind of a back and forth. But seeing the pressure of the English, he started to pull back. The English knew this guy can't get away from us. So we had a sharp engagement here. We got to keep after him because he links up. It's going to be a huge, huge problem.
Was this maneuver forced or was it kind of rope to dope?
It was a little bit. I would say it's a little bit of both because Sher Singh knew he was being tailed, crossed the river, and set up position, anticipating their arrival, and was fight. And so he had the benefit of the ground he was on, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, but he also knew the English were coming after him, so it was a rope a dope kind of stringing you along because they couldn't not engage the English; they have to.
Right.
So that was a sharp engagement, as I said. So he's pulling back. So they pulled back within the general area of a small town called Chillinwalla. By this point, though, the English had been on the constant move. They had assembled, they deployed. They're kind of basically on a race to get to this guy. At first, they were trying to get to the fortress. That was taken care of. So then it became more after getting after Sher Singh and his army. So Gow and his men are tired. He's like, okay, we're just going to set up camp around here, around this small town in the general area. Nothing's probably going to happen today. And this is around January 13th, 1849. Well, the Sikh army had a whole different idea. They saw him deployed. They knew they were tired, and they felt now's their chance. So about 2 o'clock in that afternoon, they started raining rounds onto the English. Now, what's important to know is that it's a heavy forest, almost jungle-like. They had set their main body of their troops within the jungle, including artillery, to fire from cover into the English. Well, at this point, that's not going to sit well. English pride.
How many armies would get their faces smushed with that? Go in the woods over there, private.
So by this point, what the English don't know, because they didn't really have the use or did use any real intelligence. Sher Singh assembled an army of between 20 and 40,000 at this point, and about 62 guns. So it was a well-proportioned, well-provisioned, well-supplied Khalsa army from the Sikh Empire that Gow was facing off with. But being shelled didn't sit over well. So Gow immediately orders the 24th British Regiment of about 1,000 troops to basically cross 300 yards in front of that jungle, get into that jungle, and get after those guns. It's like, make that happen, boys. You're English. These are just locals.
Picket much?
Whew. Talk about a tough go. Makes me think immediately of Pickett's charge, right?
Right.
Get across those grounds, boys, and make that happen. Well, easier said than done, but the valor of that 24th British Regiment was fantastic because they followed orders. They charge across grounds, receiving musket fire and artillery fire. They get into the jungle. It's fierce hand-to-hand combat. The Sikhs with their drawn swords, their curved swords, British bayonets, British swords. So the British managed to capture dozens of guns. But in their zeal, their lust for battle, the 24th became detached from its supporting infantry. So when they charged in, they didn't realize that we're kind of on our own, guys. Oh, whoops. This is a big problem now. The Sikh were very aware of that, regrouped, recaptured cannons, and really mauled the 24th. The 24th took so many casualties, over 500, that it basically lost its total effectiveness as a regiment at this point. So the center infantry drive was a big black eye for the English right off the bat. So then we have our two flanks. So the British left was commanded by General Thackwell. His cavalry were doing an exceptional, what you would know as the ideal English job when it comes to English cavalry. So they had the 3rd Dragoons, the 3rd Light Infantry. So they were really, they were just running roughshod over Sikh infantry, inflicting massive casualties on them, which forced the Sikh to divert more resources around to try to shore their up the left flank. But then we go to the English right flank, and there's a big problem over there because we have the complete opposite. General Thackwell, very, very good general, leading from the front, good tactics. Then we get to the other side. We have Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Pope, who's a whole complete opposite. This is an old guy, a lot of ailments, couldn't even get on his horse without people helping him onto his horse. Sounds very much like somebody else.
Like Winfield Scott,
Exactly. Reading this,
the
researching this,
savior of the Union.
as soon as I read this, I'm like, wow, how ironic. But yeah, absolutely. Just shouldn't be there at this stage of the game whatsoever.
Right.
But he's the commander, so he gets helped up. So his second cavalry brigade that he has on the right was a disaster. He had positioned them in such a way that they were blocking our British artillery guns from firing because otherwise they would be hitting their own men. So he positioned them in a horrible way. The Sikhs were taking advantage of that hands down. They saw disarray and disorder, so they were just decimating round after round, just pouring into the British right, which nearly collapsed the British right because the Sikh infantry was pushing ahead, driving the British right back and nearly rolled it up. It was only stopped by finally, once basically enough of them were cleared and to save the whole line, the British used grape shot to stop the infantry attack by the Sikh army. And that basically saved the British right because that would have rolled it up and they would have just pushed right on through.
I know. Yeah, yeah.
That disaster was just saved by British guns on the right flank. So by this point, though, it was late in the day, and per typical of the time, combat would end basically at dark, and that's basically what happened. So both sides would pull back and reassess. So what we saw was the British got bloodied. They lost about 89 officers, 2,300 were killed or wounded, and they lost 6 guns. What the Sikh felt, for them, this was a major victory. Even though they lost 4,000 casualties, but they captured 3 British colors and they recovered 28 of their guns that were originally captured. But above all, they seriously bloodied and gave the British a big black eye, further reinforcing that they're not invincible, that they can take these guys when driven enough. So it's the battle's been claimed at times as a victory by both sides. I think you could say a moral victory for the Sikh because of their damage they inflicted, but they did withdraw from the field first. So per tradition, the English consider that a victory because they were still on the field last. So, but when you look at the reality of it, it showed a local force really, really giving a good beatdown to an established colonial army. So it would take another couple battles before the English would finally achieve their ultimate victory and claim the Punjab as a whole, which is really what they wanted, to do all along.
Right. Wow. The this might be a two-parter, folks, because Mike's only hit on about 72,000 things that parallel military history, especially our military history, but around the world. Since that day, the lessons learned from that battle weren't immediate. They were more multi-generational because 5 years later, you still had the Brits on the Crimea. Jeez.
Yep, it's all right.
Yeah, and they behaved in such a way as to have not learned those lessons. And I think the reason that is because it was only 5 years later. You still had the stodgy, we always did it this way, officers in charge.
Yep.
But I'm equally sure, and this happens to this day, the mid-level officers were aware of what happened in the Punjab.
Yep.
And were more than likely ordered to stand down and shut up when they were saying, we don't want to do this.
Yeah.
We don't want to fire blind into this situation.
Absolutely. And the debacle by the British cavalry on the right flank was still very much in the mindsets of a lot of those guys when they arrived in the Crimea to fight the Russians. So the famous charge of the Light Brigade, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that, hey, that was very fresh in their mind for the performance of the British cavalry on the right flank, at least at Chillenwalla just a few years before. that how that was such a disaster. We're not going to repeat this. Let's charge down the valley. And we know how that ended, but to your point, yeah, it's the officers in the field, leading the men, pleading, "Hey, this is not good." But officers above, "Hey, we haven't learned enough yet. Let's go ahead."
That's right. We're the British. We can ride roughshod anywhere.
Why not? It's
But the lessons would be learned, and
Yep.
I have to credit the Brits for finally getting it, and and for disseminating the information. Some generals like to hear the sound of their own voice. Irwin McDowell, for example. Others read the dispatches. They read the dispatches of other generals, successful and unsuccessful. Lee comes to mind.
Yep.
He was an instructor at one point,
Yep.
and he was a student of history. So I don't doubt for a minute at the advent of the Civil War, he was aware of a battle that took place only 14 years before, I think,
Yep.
and less than that, and was fully cognizant of the lessons learned. And for most of the war, you'll see that in his style.
Yep.
He also had British advisors.
Yes, he
of his
did.
time.
Yep.
So there was probably people putting a bug in his ear. You got to remember this about an opposing force.
Yep.
Intelligence, the intelligence failures at Chillianwalla.
Yes. Yep.
Lee was not going to have that. He had Beaufort and Stewart and Jackson's Valley campaign.
Oh yeah.
They were a fly in the ointment for the Union, but they were also collecting intelligence. They would go wide of their own advance and then come back with valuable information.
Yep.
Robert E. Lee was not clairvoyant. He was not a mind reader.
Nope. It's in a lot of ways, as I mentioned this a little bit ago too, talking about Chillianwalla, is at Gettysburg, Lee's order. I think it's important to keep in mind that Lee was very dialed into dispatches, and in my mind, he was a good tactician generally. I think there's a lot to be said for he had opportunity in a strategic sense, but I just want to focus on Gettysburg and Pickett's charge because as I was talking about the 24th being ordered across the field to charge 300 yards, it made me think of Pickett's charge. And at that time, Lee was, well documented about Lee feeling his boys could whip anybody. His infantry could whip anybody, whether it's across open field or not. And to me, that's so much buying into your own mystique by that point of the game. And I'm just like, oh, it's painful.
I compare him to MacArthur.
Yes.
Who we'll talk about in just a minute. I'm going to ask you.
Yeah.
But at some point, these guys start to believe their own press, their own headlines.
Yes. Yep.
And I forget if it was Longstreet or A.P. Hill. I want to say Longstreet. Died never having forgiven Lee for Gettysburg. He was saying, look, a couple of the generals were saying, D.C. is right there.
Yep.
We can go there. If we show up in D.C., the war's over. They'll sue for a peace. We'll have a Confederacy.
Absolutely.
And Lee says, nah, whoop them here. Whoop them here.
Please tell a friend about the Free Zone Communique. We live and die with the share and subscribe buttons. Please use affiliate and sponsor buttons to support our work. Thank you very much for joining us today.